Shavua Tov, Yom Tov to everybody. Yes, in Israel you just say Yom Tov every day. Thinking ahead, I really need this Shabbat. I don't want to wish it away at all. Anyway, hi everybody. Parshat Lecha, and I've entitled this particular discussion, When Role Models Disappoint, Part 1. And yes, next week will be Part 2. So this week we speak about Avram, who will later become Avram Avinu, whose praises we sing about and acknowledge in our prayers, leads humanity, as so many claim, to ethical monotheism, where belief in the one and only one holy God keeps us humble, checks our hubris, and hopefully inspires us to be our best selves. We love to tell the stories, including the one from the Midrash where he smashed his father's idols, how he advocated for the people of Sodom and Amorah, and so many other things. So what happens here? We read in this parsha, there was a famine in the land. Va'Yeira ba'aretz, Vayired Avram Mitzrayim lagur sham ki kaved ha'araf ba'aretz. Avram left the land of Canaan and moved down to Mitzrayim to live there because the famine was so difficult. So Rashi says that he goes to that land where he would think ill of the words of the Holy One, blessed be God, who ordered Avram to go to Canaan, and now he was forcing him to leave it. And that's from Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. So is Avram feeling some angst here in terms of how he would respond to this test? Now it comes to pass, he draws near to Egypt. He says to Sarai, his wife, Hinena yadati ki isha yefat mare'at. I know that you are a beautiful woman. And the Midrash tells us that why does he say now, I know you are a beautiful woman? So the Midrash, again, who likes to amplify the good qualities of Avram, says that he really didn't look at her that way. So there's this kind of trope from Chava and Adam where they didn't know that they were arumim, that they were naked until they ate from the tree. He didn't realize that his wife was this beautiful until he comes to Mitzrayim, and he has to leave the comfort of his own context. Another possibility is that it's customary that through the hardship of travel, one becomes unattractive, and we are still quoting from the Midrash Agadan, also from Rashi, and that even with the travails of travel, anybody who's gotten off a plane after a 14-hour flight knows what that feels like. You can imagine here, this travel without planes, without trains, without cars, all that. She still retained her beauty. Another possibility is the time has come where I'm concerned about your beauty. So what does Avram mean here? We go to the next pasuk and we read, it will come that the Egyptians will see you and they will say, Ishto zot, this is his wife. They will kill me and then they will take you and you will live. Please, Sarah, to avoid this, say that you are my sister. Imrina achoti at, lema'an itavli, in order that it will go well with me because of you and that my soul may live because of you. So Rashi suggests, Leman yitavli, it means yitnu li matanot. They will give me gifts if I hand you over to them. It comes to pass, Avram comes to Egypt. The Egyptians see his wife. She's very pretty. Pharaoh's princes see her. They praise her to Pharaoh. She's taken to the house of Pharaoh. He does indeed give Avram his gifts. And then the Lord plagues Pharaoh with great plagues on account of Sarai, his wife. Because the idea being that because he said it's her sister and not his wife, yes, he will get gifts and she will be taken as a wife in Pharaoh's household. So it cannot be ignored that Avram shows incredible acumen in dealing with multiple threats and battles in this parsha, dividing his camp, figuring out how to negotiate various kings and nations that are at war, and so on. What's going on here, and why? This is not dissimilar to our angst and puzzlement over his advocating for Sodom and Amorah, and yet later not for his son Yitzchak, or so it may seem to us. Rabbinic apologetics aside, let's look at this from the perspective of being human, of addressing fear, of having to think outside of the box, of how to get out of a threatening situation with one's enemies. Is the whole story on the surface, or do we need to dig a bit deeper? The Zohar, our font of depth and inner meanings, asks the same question. Rabbi Eliezer asked, would Avram, who feared God and was loved by God, say this about his wife for his own benefit? Rabbi Eliezer explains, even though Avram feared God, Avram did not rely on his own merit. He did not ask God to save Sarah in his own merit, but rather in hers. Avram also knew that it was through the merit of Sarah that he would accumulate wealth from the other nations, since a man acquires money in the merit of his wife. He relied on her merit, that he would not be hurt and that she would not be touched. And because of this, he was not afraid to say, she is my sister. In other words, the Zohar is attributing to Avram this wisdom that in spite of the ruse that he creates, all would work out well. Based on the Zohar, Avram's reasoning is twofold. One, he's confident that he's not worthy of being saved by death, but he was fully confident that God would never allow his holy wife to be violated. In his mind, according to this view, she faced no danger. And two, Avram also knew the divine rule that a man's wealth is earned through his wife's merit. In this case, a lucrative opportunity was presenting itself, one that would come about directly through Sarah. Her abduction would bring him wealth. Two very different ways of looking at this. And this is in fact what happened. Sarah is taken, but a few hours later, so we're told, she walks away untouched. And Pharaoh showers Abraham with an abundance of wealth. Is it one leader to another? He gives me so much honor, he's willing to give me his wife, who he says is his sister, as his wife. Again, apologetics. Natalie Harder of the Jewish Women's Archives pulls together some additional thinking on this troubling and confusing matter that we do not want to so summarily dismiss. She writes, when I first read the line through Sarai, it did go well with Avram. I wanted to be optimistic. Go Sarai, the first woman to succeed in the workplace, and in the Torah no less. But did she really succeed? As far as I can tell from the text, she never consented to Avram's plan. And just as a side note, we often see this where the woman is silent. We'll see this again with Akedah. And the very next text we read is about Sarah's death. Harder continues. Avram exploited his wife's beauty and sexuality for economic gain. How do we justify that? The Midrash from the Torah, a woman's commentary, explains as follows, that the exchange of a woman has taken place. Regardless of the fact that this text is part of Judaism, the religion I am, says Natalie Harder, committed to and hold dear, there is no way that I, Natalie Harder, and I'm going to agree with her here, as a Jewish woman, can stand by the idea that it's okay to treat women as possessions instead of people. I do want to, in terms of giving a little bit of historical context, indicate that this in fact was the case. That, for example, we have these ketubot, which I've spoken of in the past in other contexts, from women in the Middle Ages that are all creased because they would hold them in their pocket to show when they went to market that they belonged to another man and therefore would not be raped, hopefully. As late as the beginning of the 20th century, women in Great Britain were still seen as property law acquisitions. Today, look at what is being attempted in taking away hard-won rights for women. This is not a historical anomaly. It is way too imprinted on our past. Rabbi Naama Daphne Kellen of the Leo Beck Education Center in Haifa, Israel, says that there are 3 ways to handle this text and Jewish texts in general with which one profoundly disagrees. 1, you ignore the text. 2, you put it in the historical context from which it comes. And 3, you can rewrite the passage so that it aligns more closely with your point of view. According to the Torah, these events did happen. Whether we like it or not, they are part of our tradition. And rewriting them so that we're more comfortable with them is totally missing the point. Back to Harder. She says, just because a story upsets me and makes me uncomfortable does not mean that it should be swept under the rug. I don't want a new story. I want more of this story. What happened next? Did Avram feel badly for all he did to his wife? Did Sarai feel betrayed or taken advantage of? Did this negatively impact their relationship? And if so, how were they able to, and did they work past it? As for me, I am going for the following 2 factors to explain how we should read the story. 1, yes, historical context is important. And looking at the vulnerability of our time and our situation and the people that are impacted by it, one does not need to go very far to see where women are chattel, women are property, women do not have agency over their own selves. 2, human beings are human beings. As human beings, they have fear, they have foibles. And to acknowledge that is to slip into other non-Jewish perspectives that allow for the notion of being perfect. Perfection in human beings is simply something that we do not, as Jews, accept. The Midrash likes to paint Avraham, and Sarai, Sarah, as the ideal couple. As Rav Nissan Mendel explains from the Chabad perspective, Avram and Sarai soon become known in Haran as very fine people. They were kind to all. They were very friendly and helpful. Avram always tried to make peace amongst people. He taught them how to live happily. He told them to get rid of their idols and their demons and trust in the one and only one God, the creator of heavens and earth. And what Avram did for the men, Sarai did for the women, for she was just as kind and just as wise. Avram's tent was always full of people, hachnasat orchim, who came to refresh themselves and to listen to his words of wisdom. And so was Sarai's tent, always full of women who came to enjoy her hospitality and listen to her and learn how to live in happiness and peace with themselves and with each other. So here's my thought. We all know of people who are so giving and so caring and concerned about everyone that perhaps they do not have the time or energy for their own family. How many times do we hear of a couple or a family that fractures and we are surprised because from the outside they look ideal? For the next few weeks, we will see these fractures in the relationship between Avram and Sarai, even when they become known as Avraham and Sarah. We will see it regarding Hagar and Yishmael. We will see it again when there is no more interaction between Sarah and Avraham after Akedat Yitzchak, about which Sarah is not informed to the best of our knowledge. Is it truly the ideal that we seek for ourselves and our children to be such doers of chesed for the world that we ignore or do not put the proper effort into our own families? Is this something that we might legitimately consider holding Avram responsible for? Rabbi Dr. Leonard Kravitz of the Reform Movement suggests as follows. The sage's reasoning becomes clear if we understand Sarah's role as Abraham's partner as well as his wife. Just as Abraham in affirming his faith in God, converts others to Judaism, so according to the rabbis did Sarah. He converted the men, she the women. It was said that Sarah had an even greater gift of prophecy than her husband. When Avram was troubled about sending away Hagar and Ishmael, he's told by God to accede to Sarah's request because her understanding of the bigger picture transcended his. This partnership was not perfect. Avram misled Sarah about his plan to sacrifice Yitzchak on Mount Moriah, learning of the Akedah and the near death of her son. We are told she may have died of shock. While our scripture portrays Abraham and Sarah as real people, we cannot ignore the missteps here. Avram courageously follows God's call, yet his fear of Pharaoh and King Abimelech induces him to lie about the status of his wife. And it must be stressed that in both cases, he identifies her as his sister, eligible to be married. And I will add here that if we are asking why he did the same thing the second time, remember, the strategy worked the first time. Not only that, Yitzchak will repeat the ruse with Rebekah later. Returning to the words of Rabbi Dr. Kravitz. Sarah is willing to arrange for Hagar to bear her husband a child, but later, out of jealousy, orders Avram to cast them out. When Avram receives God's call to go forth, Sarah faithfully and dutifully joins her husband's religious quest. But when she receives her own revelations about the forthcoming birth of a son, she laughs in disbelief because of the couple's advanced age. God reports her reaction to Avram, but discreetly omits Sarah's remark that Avram is too old. Therefore, we begin to see these fractures in the relationship. This divine reticence, according to the rabbis, teaches us that to maintain shalom bayit, even God might bend the truth. We can think about that what we want. So needless to say, there are those in my own academic world and my own Jewish learning world who would be horrified at my reflecting and referencing this perspective. However, my question is, why are we always so afraid of telling the story of our humanity precisely as we were created? Yeah, Sarah laughs when she's told that she will have a child. Is that nervous laughter or is it disbelief? Avram lies about Sarah not being his wife, not once but twice, and this will be repeated by his son Yitzchak regarding his own wife Rivka when he is in a similar bind. Avram from a personal perspective does not exhibit the same qualities of care and compassion that he shows to Sodom and Amorah, Lot, and so many others with his own nuclear family. And we have every right to be troubled by this notion. In returning to our rabbinic texts, we note yet another curious notion about Avram and Sarai that will continue to baffle us in the coming weeks. Namely, it is suggested that either one or both of them were infertile. As we learn in Yevamot 64a to 64b in the Talmud Bavli, Rabbi Yitzchak says, "For what reasons were our ancestors initially infertile?" Rabbi Ami says, Avram and Sarai were originally tum tamim, people whose sexual organs were concealed and not functional. As it is stated, look to the rock from where you were hewn, and to the hole of the pit from where you were dug. And then in the next pasuk it says, in the next verse, this is from Yeshayahu, Isaiah, in chapter 51, it says, look to Avram your father, and Sarah who bore you. Which according to Yevamot, according to the rabbis of the Gemara, means that the sexual organs were fashioned for them over the course of time, and only functional later in their lives. So here we are. Our leaders, our patriarchs, our matriarchs, who are our role models, are that precisely because of their imperfections and how they deal with them. Whether reacting from fear in what might not be the best way to respond, laughing at God, who suggests a woman advanced in years can give birth, and so many other instances where families are indeed fractured, as we will see in Mishpachat Abraham and in those to come afterwards. What we have to remember here is that God created the human being both in the image of God and from the material resources of the ground. We are not without flaws. We will not always react appropriately at all times. And in this, our leaders are precisely the role models we should and must follow. Returning to a larger external analysis, as we said previously, Professor Christoph Levin looks at these narratives from a larger historical literary perspective and comments that the sister-wife story of Avram and Sarah in Egypt reworks the sister-wife story of Yitzhak and Rebekah in Gerar. The passage is yet another intertextual bricolage composed to have Abraham as the paradigmatic first Israelite personally experience the nation's core challenges and redemptive events later in their history. And this will be repeated over and over and over again. In summary, how can we be disappointed in our role models when they are really made of the same stuff as we are? Yes, we are taught to expect more from them. Throughout Jewish texts, leaders are indeed held to higher standards in their roles as heads of community in all instances. But here is what we have to remember: that the standards may be higher, but their level of humanity, of being a human being, with its imperfections, reactions, and limitations, is not any different from anybody else. This is an ongoing theme in our biblical, rabbinic, and general Jewish teachings. We may have disappointments in our leaders, as we do in ourselves, but ultimately, whether their experiences are didactic in application, as Professor Levin would have it, or instructive in every way, human, as in the Jewish Women's Archives suggest, this is our reality and theirs. We are human. We are imperfect. We will disappoint ourselves. We will disappoint each other. Kol Adam Nivra B'Tselem Elokim, Lo Ke-Elokim. We have to remember that we are created from the dust of the earth, and we are asked to do the best we can. Every human being is, as we are taught, created in the image of God. But we are in no way as complete, as perfect, and as total as God. No matter who our role models are, that is the lesson that we glean from them. Shabbat Shalom to all.